We're in the middle of the Democratic National Convention, and this is a significant day because Mayor Muriel Bowser just spoke in front of the convention and in front of the nation. And your group was very critical of her and some of the things she had to say. So what is your main issue today following her speech?
Yeah, I think it's very clear that number one, she has either really believed in what she's saying about DC and setting a pace for Black Lives Mattering, um, or she really is crafting a narrative around DC, leaning on the fact that this is the seat of government for the United States, and needing to make a visible connection between Black Lives Matter and herself. But the truth is that in all ways, especially when it comes to policing and protesting, Muriel Bowser has proven over and over again that she supports, she knows about and sanctions the violent way that police crack down on protesters.
Has your group had a chance to sit down with either the mayor or the police leadership or the mayor's administration or anything like that to voice your concerns and hear what they have to say about it?
They voice how they feel all the time on TV, in press conferences, in the media, as do we. We don't trust what they would say being anything different than what they would do. And I think that it's important to understand that because they are public people, that what they say and do should be in the public. So to us, they know exactly what we want, why. There's press releases, there's events. We've said for years exactly the way that we feel and what we demand. So there's actually nothing more to talk about. They have just drawn a line in the sand that they're not interested in making the real shifts in both thinking and acting in ways that are no longer harmful to Black people.
So you have not requested a meeting with the police leadership or the mayor or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Do you think that might be helpful if you were to get in a room with them, or you said that wouldn't go anywhere then if you were to speak with them face to face?
Absolutely not, especially since both of them are highly surveilling me. I not only as an individual wouldn't feel safe, but also, again, I think that they are politicians, that does include Peter Newsom, and I believe that anything that they say is not just about me or just about Black Lives Matter, that they owe change and they owe an end to the lip service to all Black people in DC.
So how do you feel about the overall Black Lives movement in the DC area over the last few months? Do you think your goals are being met, and do you think your voice and your concerns are being heard?
Absolutely. I think again, people are clear about what it is we're talking about. I think also people are starting to maybe understand that we as an organization in DC is much different than saying the Black Lives Matter movement overall, and that we're only one part of that. And I feel like people should probably know that we don't expect the government, the state, the mayor, the police department to end all of the ills of society, right? Like this is actually highlighting the fact that we live in a failed state, that they actually can't do for us what is needed for us all to have real safety and to be able to thrive.
The Black Lives Matter DC movement added that defund the police part to the Black Lives Matter Plaza that's written on the street over there. What does that mean to you, defund the police? And do you think that sort of message, which could be taken as a radical message, do you think that hurts your overall cause?
The police need to be defunded. I think, number one, people are just scared to ask if we don't have the police, then what? Instead of looking at the overall. First, most people don't read the budget to know what's in the budget. I also, as Black Lives Matter DC, we are abolitionists. We do believe in the eventual abolition of police and prisons. We believe that they don't do the things and can't do the things that people actually want them to do. That when we're talking about safety, both the data and the numbers just don't support them being the answer to true safety in our society. They never have. They weren't created that way, and they just literally can't, regardless of how you feel about police and policing. I think that defunding the police. Also, I mean, during all of these protests, Mayor Bowser was gutting the budget of violence interruption and violence prevention and adding money to the police budget. So this is another reason why we wouldn't sit down with them. The fact that they clearly believe that the despite what they say in the news, that if Black Lives Matter, they wouldn't keep funding the agency and the practices that actively harm Black people. And so whether or not the council actually does that, which they did not do, they did not defund the police. I think people need to understand that. And actually, they got a raise. Is more about the conversation about where we invest in our communities, in ourselves, in ways that actually allow people to thrive, and aren't controlled by the whims or whatever protest is going on, that really are long lasting, generational changes to the basic standard and quality of life.
So when you say defund the police, you're actually saying abolish the police. Is that right?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
If there was no police law enforcement activity in big cities like D.C. or, Baltimore and Chicago, places that are seeing rising gun violence right now, if there was no police presence anywhere around there, how do you think that violent crime would be deterred? I mean, it's how our society has always functioned. The police respond, and there are sometimes bad actors within police departments, but overall, the police are meant to prevent some of these violent incidents. So if there was no police presence, how do you think that our cities would deal with things like that?
Right. And you said two very important words that make all the difference. The first is that they respond. Police don't deter crime. They cannot police people's minds. There's not a way for them to actually stop crime before it happens. We know that the numbers in all cities and states show that even increased policing does not, especially when it comes to homicides. And these were Mayor Bowser's words on a TV interview, that they don't actually stop homicides. And if you look at the recent homicides we've had here in DC and count the number of times that the police were actually on the scene and couldn't and didn't stop them, or the number of people who have been killed in front of police departments or on the same block as, I think what we are afraid of is saying, what do we do? But we're not looking at, is it working right now? Is it doing the thing that you think it can do? And fundamentally, can it ever be changed to do that? Because most of the things that people say that they want the police to do, you do not have to be a police officer to do. And so if it's about safety, if it's about watching over things, those are things that you don't need a gun to do. And how do we know this? Because in other countries, they don't. And so for us, yeah, they are responding to things. They cannot prevent and do not prevent crime, no matter how much. I mean, Peter Newsham testified under oath 2 years in a row when they asked him, what does increased policing do? His answer was always, it makes people feel safe. Council members pushed back and asked, what is the difference between feeling safe and being safe? Does it make people safer? He said, no, it makes people feel safe. So if people are committed to actually wanting real safety, that comes from more than just policing, then people have to be real about that. People always ask, what about the rapists and the murderers? And you have to ask yourself, what about them now? 98% of the people who are rapists are not in jail. And they're not going to go to jail. So is it really stopping anything? And people who commit harm are everywhere. We don't know. And it's actually not changing the things that we want. And the police, the prisons, there's no incentive for people to take accountability, real accountability, because at every moment you are told not to talk to the police, that even when you're arrested, you remain silent when you go. I mean, because what we know is it doesn't work. And so no matter what the crime was or not, the quote unquote punishment most likely will not fit the crime. Being innocent is not a guarantee of getting out or being set free. So people have to ask, is it really doing what we want it to do? And what are we doing? Is it working now? And if the answer is no, then not having them is going to do what? We've been told that we can't control ourselves. And the truth is, there were times before we decided we were going to let militias become police, people took care of themselves. We know what's right and wrong because communities can make norms and decisions about how they will be in relationship with each other. They can set rules. They can set ways of being with each other and develop their own systems of accountability that actually are about doing the hard work of understanding why people do the things that they do, what can prevent them from doing it again, and to repair the harm that they've caused, while also being in charge of making sure other people don't do the same thing they did.
I want to ask you about some of the actions of people involved in Black Lives Matter DC protests recently, in recent months, and even in recent days. I know that DC police made a number of arrests last week, I believe it was, and the DC police put out a statement saying that they made arrests because there were some fires started and some property damaged. When someone involved in one of your protests damages property or breaks into a business or starts a fire like that, does that interfere with your overall message and your goals?
So I think we should also be clear that our chapter hasn't had protests. What you're seeing are new groups and individuals who are who are calling for protests. We had a caravan. We're getting ready to do a vigil. But as far as protests, these are people who are doing their own. I also think it's a distraction to worry about property. I feel like the media, even the police, talk more about property than they do about people.
Are you against the property damage?
I just don't care because I have a limited amount of energy and I have a limited amount of energy to spend on the things that I'm principled about. And so that doesn't include spending time wondering and caring about how other people decide, especially other oppressed people, how they decide to protest against oppressors. I think that it's a distraction. It's a distraction just like comparing Black Lives Matter to not caring about community violence. All of these things are just made to be sensational. Protest is protest. And I feel like it's not about how, it's about why we're protesting. And so the fact that they put out statements about that instead of how upset they were about the things that their officers are doing, again, after Pershing Park, after J20 and the inauguration, that they're still kettling people, Swan Street, says to me that it's a distraction for them too. It's the same thing they do when they kill someone. Is the first thing that comes to mind is them talking about how they stole a piece of gum when they were 5 years old, not the fact that they were killed by police. So I think it's a double standard that we talk about violence only as it relates to people who are paid not to be violent. And to be honest, coming to a protest, it's why we don't use the binary of peaceful versus violent protests, because it's the police that bring the guns and the riot gear. They are ready to attack. They come there prepared to quell dissent. That's not how we come to protest anybody. So I think focusing on all of that is it's a distraction, and it's a long held tactic to get us off of talking about what's actually happening. All of this was happening the same time that videos of people that MPD has killed were coming out. That the fact that Mayor Bowser is introducing George Floyd's family is disgusting. And that's where we should be talking. And she did it on purpose, overlooking Black Lives Matter Plaza. All of these things are made to actually distract, make other people who don't earn the right of talking about Black Lives Matter look like they're leading it. And by that, I mean Muriel Bowser.
You said earlier that the main goal of your movement is to get public support, get your message across, and get your voice heard and make change in society. But when you say you don't care about other people having their property damaged, I think that might shut down the minds of anyone who might be open to listening to your message or be open to hearing you. Don't you think that might close their minds when they hear that you don't care if someone gets hurt or if property is damaged?
Well, I think that is a fundamental question about, that's not actually why we're not in the streets just because we want followers to feel comfortable with our message. We're actually in the street because we want the state to stop killing Black people. So the goal of the movement isn't just to have more people march. We literally are marching for the lives of Black people. So if folks are uncomfortable with that, they've been uncomfortable with talking about how they're complicit in racism and white supremacy too. So, I mean, they can be, they don't, everybody is a critic when it comes to however we do anything. But the goal of the movement is to stop Black lives from being murdered. It's not for building a team of new marchers. It's not for building a new set of people who can take selfies on Black Lives Matter Plaza. It is about demanding the dignity and the very life of Black people here and around the world.
You just mentioned critics of your movement. We often hear critics say that you speak out against police violence against people of color, but we don't often hear your group talk about gun violence in Black communities in D.C., Baltimore, and Chicago, and that there's a criticism that maybe you should be talking more about that as well. What is your response when you hear that criticism?
My response is that that's a lazy assumption. If you look us up, right now we work with families every single week of people that are killed in D.C., but we don't do it for the cameras. I think that it's also a lazy assumption to assume that Black Lives Matter is supposed to be the group for everything, and that people get to tell us how we spend our volunteer time at the same time that our group has lost people in community violence. We are the ones who helped push the NEAR Act from getting written to adopted to funded to now implemented. So the thing is that people just they're not actually out there themselves to see us at the vigils, to see us at the murder sites, or to get the therapy that we need after being at 6 murder sites in a 2-week period. So I think it's lazy. I think that people just always want something to complain about, because what they forget is we're Black. We live in these communities. I've had 5 homicides within a 2-block radius over the last year. So there's no way that we can't be worried about it, that we can't speak out about it. We all have children. And again, most of us have been touched by or are victims of violence because we're Black and we live in DC. So, I would encourage people to actually look instead of assuming, because chances are we're doing more work around Black lives, period, than they are, because we don't have time to criticize things that we could Google online.